So, this is my take on the whole Joel Osteen nonsense. Okay, so Joel Osteen always looked like Woody from Toy Story to me. If you put a cowboy hat on his head, that's neither here nor there. But he is one of the preachers that every morning on TBN, I used to watch with my mother. There was a lineup. There was Joel Osteen, Paula White, Joyce Meyer, a whole bunch of them. I think Jesse Duplantis was on that lineup as well. I always liked to listen to Joel Osteen when I was a Christian because his messages were not too bogged down with drama. They were very lighthearted, very generic, easy to swallow, candy-coated, standard Christian stuff. I'm not surprised that he did not open his doors to the refugees of Hurricane Harvey. Because there's one thing I've learned from being a Christian is a lot of the leadership tend to they think of themselves first. I was in a church, my family was heavily integrated with a church that it benefited them to up and move, and they didn't just say, we're very sorry, we're closing our doors, we're going to leave. They actually felt in a level of expectation of everybody in the church to up and leave and move with them. Some people actually did. They sold the building for a couple of million and they skipped town. That was a very pivotal moment, I think, for my family in their belief, because I was actually employed by the church. I worked in their daycare, as was my sister, as was my mother. My father assisted in doing sound and lighting sometimes on Sundays, especially if they had my mother, being in the theater world, they utilized all of her skills for their benefit. They had her be in charge of the drama ministry, and she would put on plays for the church and everything, and I would act in them, and as with my sister wrote songs for some of these plays, and our family was very, very heavily integrated into this system. And then they up and left, and they expected us to, their message was, we're not saying that you have to come with us, but we are saying that the blessing is in Tennessee, and if you want to be on that train, you better come. And it was just like, how can you expect people to leave their mortgage, to leave their lives, to uproot themselves just to move because you found a better offer for a building and you want to take the millions of dollars that the building that you already own is worth and pocket it? Because they went and they got a storefront, I believe, was the next move. So all of those millions literally just went into their pockets. So, that was a pivotal moment for my family and I, but that's why I'm not surprised about this whole Joel Osteen thing. Churches, and the people that lead them, I've only ever met one pastor who was willing to get his hands dirty. He would take a homeless guy off the street who was covered in shit. He would put him on his couch in his office. The couch got covered in shit. He helped him take a bath. He fed the man. That was one pastor. And that pastor got kicked out of the church, I believe, or either he got kicked out, he quit, because he saw what was going on with the bigger church, the mega church, and he said, this isn't right, we should be helping people. And I don't even know if that guy's still around, but he tried. That was the one person I've ever known to actually try to practice what they preach and live what they are saying. But majority of church members are very clean. Not church members, church leaders, very clean, very rich, very elegant, and they protect their interests. Now, a lot of people criticize churches for their size or for the amount of money that they have. Maybe I'm a cynic, but I don't give a shit about that. I don't care about the pastors having $1 million jets. I don't care about them trying to massage money out of people, because let's face it, that's everywhere. That's in the healthcare industry, that's in showbiz, that's in that's everywhere. They're everywhere you go, you're going to find people who are going to try to get an angle for monetary gain. That's on YouTube. There are people, look at Jake Paul. Jake Paul is attempting to make himself look like such a great hero by causing a scene at Walmart and saying, look everybody, I'm giving money to the hurricane effort. I mean, he's just doing that for his image. People do that. That's the way people are. What bothers me about Christianity as a whole is the fact that when you actually read the ancient text that the Bible is based on, the Bible, the Word of God, and you know the history of how the monarchs in Europe not just massaged things in the book to change it to suit their narrative, but actually went to the point of adding things that weren't there and taking things that were there and removing them because they wanted people to give to, okay, for example, they replaced love as one of the fruits of the Spirit with the word charity. Why did they do this? Because they wanted people to give money. If they didn't hold that sacred, then the entire foundation of Christianity, of the Word of God, and we're believing it, doesn't exist. Doesn't exist because it takes a lot of cognitive dissonance to know that King James and these European monarchs literally took these ancient texts, rewrote them to fit a narrative so that they can have supremacy and monetary dominance over the nations that they rule. To ignore that and to continue to have faith in this Bible is just it. When I was in my teens, I could muster the cognitive dissonance for that, but now as a 34-year-old, I no longer can. I just can't. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You know that last bit of the Lord's Prayer, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. You know that was never even in the original text. They added that because they thought it would sound more dramatic. If they're willing to take the Lord's Prayer, which is supposed to be an example of how we're supposed to interact with the divine, and just embellish it because they thought it sounded boring, and add things and subtract things and manipulate it in that way, what else in these sacred texts did they fuck around with? Were these sacred texts even supposed to be collected and considered as sacred texts, or were they just a general collection of works that have accumulated over time? What was the intent of the Bible at all, other than these European monarchs who wanted to manipulate and control the minds of their people? So, knowing the history, the actual history of Christianity in the Bible, that's why I do not believe in being a Christian anymore. Now, I believe that there is a God, not because of what these ancient manipulated texts say, but because of experiences that I've had one-on-one. I believe that there was something to Jesus, this Jesus character of Nazareth. He said things that were profound and seem somewhat simple to us now, but considering the lack of progression in those times where women were still sold as objects and slavery was still considered acceptable, what he was saying was some pretty groundbreaking stuff. So I think that there was something to this Jesus character. But after that, this whole idea of Christianity was built upon false and manipulated information, and I can't turn my back on the knowledge of that. The whole concept of Satan as this entity that was, that turned on God and took 1/3 of the angels and all of that story, that's fiction. Somebody added that later. That is not canon to the actual scripts. There's so much in the Bible in the Bible itself that is not canon. There's so much in Christianity itself that we were supposed to believe that was not canon, that what are we supposed to believe? There is no sources. The source material has been so manipulated, there is nothing that we can consider to be real. Do you know in the ancient text, sometimes God was referred to in the feminine sense, using a feminine pronoun? And they took that away because they didn't want women to disobey their husbands. And this is what they did in Europe. They took those pronouns away because they said, we don't want women to get too big for their britches here. And they took the female pronouns for God and they turned them to male. It was supposed to be heavenly parent, sometimes even expressed as a mother, a divine mother. And I'm not talking about Mary, because that came later. I'm talking about the ancient text, even in the Old Testament. And they took it away because they didn't want the family to give the mother any power. They wanted the structure of the family to be all dependent on the male power. And that's not something that was actually in the Bible. That's something that came from Europe. That's something that came from King James. The King James version of the Bible is so toxically poisoned from the original text that it's practically a fan fiction. It's a fan fiction. Everything that you believe in Christianity is fan fiction. It is not canon. So why am I going to go along with a religion that's based on falsehoods? It doesn't even agree with itself. You know, I mean, once you get the information for that, it's kind of like you get a little red pilled. So, I'm not surprised that Joel Osteen did what he did. Because a lot of people, and the same goes for feminism, the same goes for any type of ism, any type of ideology where one person is leading a group of other people, or one set of behaviors is supposed to be the way you are, even if that's not the way you really are. These things, Christianity, feminism, all of these isms are used to emotionally manipulate people so a certain select few can get ahead. I don't think feminism started out that way, but it became that way. I don't think Christianity started out that way, but it became that way. So, that's the way it is. But don't be surprised that this guy is self-interest motivated. Don't be surprised that now all of a sudden, now that he's getting a social media backlash, all of a sudden Joel Osteen opens his doors. Of course! Of course! What were you guys all expecting? And to be outraged on it is kind of redundant, don't you think? He shouldn't even have millions of dollars, and yet there he is with his millions of dollars. Then again, we live in a nation where you can play baseball and make millions of dollars for playing a game. You can play pretend on a camera and be a superstar for millions of dollars. Meanwhile, teachers are just barely making ends meet. Welcome to America, people. This is planet Earth, where weirdness is basically the way things are all the time.